Sound does matter when it comes to lipless crankbait fishing, but not all the time. This is a few scenarios that I think sound really matters. So the first one, let me explain what is actually happening under the water and what is attracting the fish. So if you have a bait that has a bunch of little BBs in it, it's loud, the fish are going to be attracted by sound. Now if you have the one that just has the one big tungsten ball in it, that's going to attract the fish through their lateral line. So if you're fishing in, let's say, more stained water where the fish are just kind of feeling the bait, they're not hearing it as much, they're not seeing it, they're feeding through their lateral line, they're a fish that isn't used to seeing things, the tungsten one knocker is the better way to go. Now if you have fish that are seeing stuff and they're hearing stuff and they feed through all their other senses, then the one with all the little BBs in it tends to work better. Now, a real scenario I can give you is when those waters are 40 degrees, it's super cold, those fish are coming out of their winter haunts. You know, let's say they're coming off the main river channel or they're coming out of the creek channel. They're getting up there to feed and they don't know about fishing pressure because they've been out in the abyss for a while. The reason bright colors work is the same reason that a louder bait is going to work. You just want to get their attention any way possible, and that louder bait is going to get more bites. I got a funny story about that. I fished one of my first BFLs in 2016 as a boater, and my co-angler was crushing me with the rattling version of a lipless crankbait. I was throwing the knocking version, and we pull up to my first spot. These are all places that I got bit in practice. We pull up, my co-angler catches a 5-pounder. I said, all right, I just missed the cast. We go to my next spot, he catches another one. My next spot catches another one. He's got 4 really good fish, and it's around noon, and the fishing's slow, water's in the 40s. Well, he breaks his bait off, and that's the only one he has, the only rattling bait he has. So now we're both throwing the one with the big tungsten ball in there. And before this situation, that was all I ever threw, was the one with the big tungsten ball in there. So now we're both throwing the tungsten ball, and I'm getting the first cast because I'm the boater, so I'm getting the first shot at these fish, and I start catching them everywhere we go. So it was like when the fish had an option to choose between the two, like one was really sticking out to them was that louder bait, and they were going and eating that one every time. Most of these spots probably just had 1 or 2 fish on them. So when we'd both be throwing our baits at that 1 or 2 fish, they would always gravitate towards the louder bait. So that's kind of the situation that I've seen. When the water's cool, you want to go with the louder bait. The next situation is, I've talked about sound and pitch in my chatterbait video. This is the same thing with lipless. So whenever I'm catching them on a certain color, let's say I'm catching them on this chartreuse lemon lime color, and one knocker, it's usually the one I'm going to be throwing first. Well, if they stop biting this one, I am always going to have another one with a different pitch. This one being the rattling version, this one being the knocking version. I'm always going to have that same color ready to go. I'm going to have fresh hooks on there, and that's going to be cut this one off, tie this one on, make a few casts. Now, I have almost all XRKs and XR50s, or XRKs and XRs in the 25s, 50s, and 75s from Excalibur. They don't make that bait anymore. You can find them on eBay. Booyah makes one, basically the same thing. Now, that's the bait that I like to just go searching with. That's the one I typically always throw. But when I get around fish, then I'm going to dial it in more to, if I'm catching them on just the good old-fashioned XRK and that's an XR, XRK, Rayburn Red, and I'm catching them on that. I'm also going to have an XR in Rayburn ready to go. I'm going to have a Yozuri. That one's even louder. And then I'm even going to have like an old school rattle trap, because that one has a different sound. And there's a bunch of good lipless crankbaits, and there's a bunch that they used to make, they don't make anymore. So you just know a lot of guys aren't throwing that. I even have those old Berkeley Frenzies. This is the loudest one I've ever heard. Took that one out of my dad's box. That is a killer. It doesn't fish really well through the grass, But if you want the loudest possible bait, that's one of the loudest ones I've ever heard. But I'm always looking for a couple different sounds, and that just seems to get those fish to start feeding again when they have stopped. So try my few tips I have on the sound when it comes to lipless crankbaits, and I'll see you on the water.